Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline Owusu, and I'm the owner of Renew Health Clinic, also the owner of Dr. Owusu Skincare and Wellness, and the senior pastor of Living Free Now Church in Columbus, Georgia. Welcome, Renew Health Warriors, to Renew Health Thursdays. The purpose of this channel is about renewing our health in our body with increased consumption of whole foods, like such as fruits, whole fruits and vegetables daily to get healthy and to become the best version of ourselves that we can be. Um, so today we posted a video. We post a video every Thursday. So if you missed some of the videos, please go back. In our the Dr. Wusu Wellness, Skincare and Wellness channel, and just watch the videos. I think it started with Fruit Challenge Week 1, and that was the introduction, and continue to watch the other subsequent videos from there. Also, I just wanted to also mention that we do have every month a 28-day Renew Health Transformation Program going, and that is usually free for people, but you have to call the clinic number to register so that we can add your name to it. It includes, us coaching you. Anybody can do this, but one of the hardest things is the support group. So that's what we're here for. We support you. We help you through, your detox symptoms. We kind of, coach you through certain things that you may experience. We coach you through the psychological, components of how hard, things that you're used to is to give up or to make, adjustments to. So we help you with all of that, and we share educational knowledge with you. I give a personal Zoom conference or a phone conference call with all the participants every Friday at 7 p.m. And it's only for the people who are participating in it. So if you are interested, call the clinic, Renew Health Clinic, at area code 706-507-9407. Renew Health Clinic, area code 706-507-9407, and tell them that you're interested in the 28-day Renew Health Transformation Program. Thank you. All right, so with that put aside, last week I talked about the emotional component to health, and I forgot to add that professional counseling is also a strong option. I mentioned several options, but professional counseling is also a strong option if you need it for the healing of emotional traumas or stress. Today, I promised you the long-awaited insulin resistance. I promised you the topic of insulin resistance. We hear a lot about insulin resistance, but do we understand it? So today I made several notes so I can be able to discuss it with you. And we will focus on these questions. What is insulin resistance? Why is insulin resistance important to understand? How does insulin resistance affect our health? How can we also improve insulin resistance? So, what is insulin? Insulin is actually a hormone that is released by the pancreas. And the pancreas is right below, underneath your stomach, okay? And that insulin regulates the metabolism of carbohydrates, like the sugar. When you eat carbohydrates, it turns into sugar or glucose. So it regulates that metabolism by promoting the absorption of that glucose, so that sugar, from the blood, right, into the liver cells, the skeletal muscles, and the fat cells and other cells, okay? So how does this work? Well, when you eat, the food that we eat are composed of macronutrients, macro, such as carbohydrates, proteins, and or fats. And so carbohydrate, I'll kind of touch a little bit on carbohydrate metabolism. It starts in the mouth, okay? We have saliva. You start chewing the food. You put, let's say it's a rice, or potato. You put the food in your mouth. You start chewing it. The saliva has an enzyme in it called amylase. So amylase starts the breakdown of the carbohydrate in addition to your teeth breaking it down. And so the carbohydrate is what you call starch. And on this channel, I really do layman's type of terms because not everybody is very familiar with medical terms. So I just try and break it down, to how, if I wasn't in medicine, how I would understand it. The broken down starch that is now in your mouth, you've chewed, and the amylase has now started breaking it down, is transferred from the mouth through the esophagus, which is inside over here, to the stomach. Okay, and from the stomach it goes into the small intestine, because in your gut you have the stomach, which is connected to the small intestine, which is connected to the large intestine, and then to your anus, okay, where food is expelled, or excretion is expelled. All right, so in the small intestine, more enzymes are released to further break down the carbohydrate or the starch to glucose. And then the glucose is absorbed into the blood, right, from the small intestine. So the small intestine is connected. So then there's a place called the brush border, so it's absorbed into the blood. So when and how does insulin then come in? Okay, when glucose is absorbed into the blood from the small intestine, there is a high level of glucose now in the bloodstream from what you just ate after a rich carbohydrate meal, or sometimes after a protein meal. Just that the protein is, let's say if the pancreas, if you ate a carbohydrate meal and the pancreas released like, let's say 10, then with protein maybe it will release like 6 or 5, okay? But it still does release some insulin. Okay, so then after this carbohydrate meal, there's a high glucose level in the bloodstream. The body then signals the pancreas to release insulin into the blood as well, to help move the high glucose, right, in the blood, from the blood into the cells. So the goal of this is you want to move the glucose from the blood into the cells, because the body's preferred source of energy is glucose. Therefore, the body wants to get glucose from the blood into the cells where it can use it for energy. Now, I want to now tell you there's food energy. So this carbohydrate that's broken down to glucose is food energy, right? But food energy is different from cell energy, because cell energy then uses this glucose that gets into the cell and goes through a very complicated series of processes called the Krebs Cycle. If anybody knows biochemistry or biology, you know about the Krebs Cycle inside the cell, and then also a whole loop of other complex processes, and then if it comes to, it forms ATP, and ATP is what the cell uses. So your food's energy broke down, the carbohydrate broke down to glucose, then the cell takes it, right, the glucose, and then breaks it down to cell energy, which is ATP, then it uses it. So I hope that you understand that. Okay, so when on the surface of the cells now, there are some receptors. They're actually called they're glycoprotein receptors, and the hormone insulin that the pancreas release, right, will bind to these glycoprotein receptors. So basically, you have the cells is like round, right, and then there are receptors on the cells. So the hormone that is released, the insulin that's released in the blood now, will bind to that receptor site on the cell. So the insulin does not go inside the cell; it binds to the receptor, and then it allows, it's like a lock and key, and then it allows the glucose to be pulled into the cell from the bloodstream. Okay, so now this receptors on the glucose, and on the cell, and the insulin in a normal person is supposed to bind to it, and then it would allow the glucose to be transported into the cell to be able to be utilized for energy. And like I said, once again, food energy is different from cell energy. Food energy is moved inside the cell to be utilized as cell energy via a series of complicated processes, like I told you, and it produces the ATP. What happens when the glycoprotein receptors and insulin process is abnormal? When the glycoprotein receptors and insulin process is abnormal, insulin resistance occurs, and this results in the glucose not being efficiently transported into the cells. Let me explain that. In a normal person, right, you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal. The carbohydrate breaks down to glucose. The insulin is released by pancreas. It comes into the bloodstream. Remember, the glucose is in the bloodstream. The insulin comes into the bloodstream. It wants to attach to that cell receptor. So it attaches to that cell receptor on the surface of the cell. It allows the glucose to go in. That's in a normal person, okay? Or the cells, the whole process is functioning right. In some people, this is abnormal. So, and I'll tell you how it becomes abnormal. But right now, I just want to explain to you it's abnormal. So when that abnormality happens, right, then the insulin cannot really attach properly to the receptor, or the receptor is rejecting or resisting the insulin from attaching to it. You see what I mean? So that's what you really call insulin resistance. So now let's continue. So when the glycoprotein receptors and insulin process is abnormal, insulin resistance occurs, and this results in the glucose not being efficiently transported into the cells. This causes a buildup. When this happens, when that receptor kind of rejects or resists the insulin from attaching to it, then this causes a buildup of glucose or sugar in the bloodstream, in the blood. So insulin is secreted because there is a high level of glucose in the blood. However, when insulin is not able to connect to the receptors on the surface to help facilitate the transport of glucose into the cells, then the insulin also builds up in or increase in the cell. So here you have a cell, it wants the glucose, but because there's some other things going on, right, it's telling the receptor, hey, you cannot allow insulin to attach to you. So now in the blood, you have a buildup of glucose, and because the insulin is not being attached, right, you also have a buildup of insulin. Do you see what I mean? Now, this is usually happening in somebody who is like a type 2, or somebody who is becoming pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, right? And we will go into that after this insulin resistance series. And the reason why I'm saying that is because in a normal person, it functions well. But in a pre-diabetic or somebody who's heading there, it kind of starts malfunctioning. Okay? And then also in a type 1 diabetic, it's kind of different because they don't even produce the insulin. So the type 1 diabetic will not have insulin unless you give them endogenous insulin. So now, excuse me. So now with this abnormality going on, the insulin resistance, you have an increase of glucose now, right? Glucose is backed up in the cells, and insulin is backed up in the cell. And this is what causes the insulin resistance. Or this is what occurs when there is insulin resistance. That's what I mean. What causes insulin resistance? So now let's go there. There are many factors that causes insulin resistance. However, one of the common factor of insulin resistance is too much fat. Whether it's dietary fat, mostly dietary fat. So when one is overweight or obese, one has too many fat cells, and the fat cells produce a molecule, a cytokine molecule called adipokines. And the adipokine travels through the bloodstream and attaches itself to that particular glycoprotein receptor on the cell that insulin wants to attach itself to, right? So when it does this, it blocks insulin, right? Or it inhibits insulin from attaching, right? Because this is your adipose tissue, your fat cell releasing these molecular cytokines to go ahead and is doing this, okay? And it's traveling and attaching itself. So therefore, it blocks insulin from doing its function of helping to move the glucose from the bloodstream into the cells. And thus, it creates a high glucose in the bloodstream from buildup. Okay, I hope everybody's following. I know it's a little, complicated, but I'm trying to break it down as easy and understandable as possible. Another reason the glycoprotein receptors on the cell surface can also become inefficient is when you eat too many fats in your diet, right? Such as cooking oils, you cook with a lot of cooking oils, animal protein, any flesh protein, kind of dairy, like, cheese and milk, fried foods, processed foods, a lot of refined food, all those things, etc. Cakes and cookies. People don't think that cake and cookies and sweet things, has a lot of saturated fat, okay, in there. Even some of the other fried stuff has trans fat. Like this is stuff that you don't really want in your body, a lot of it, okay? So, and more and much more. So the dietary fat acts just like the adipokine, which I described to you from your release being secreted from your adipose, tissues or cells. And so this dietary fat, once it's processed, right? Because when you eat fat, when you eat a meal that has fat in it, whether it's animal flesh, protein, milk, dairy, oils, whatever, it breaks down the same way. It starts in the mouth, it breaks down, goes through the esophagus, breaks down further, go to the stomach, go through small intestine, break it down further, and then is into the bloodstream as lipids, right? So now the this lipid or this fat, right, also can attach itself to the glycoprotein receptors on the cell. And so when it does that, it also inhibits the the insulin from binding to that receptor, right? Therefore, it kind of like blocking the insulin from acting so it can help facilitate the transport of the glucose into the cell. I hope this makes sense. I know it's, and please, if you have to take notes, because it's only when you write, kind of sometimes when you hear it doesn't make sense, but if you listen to over and over and you write stuff down, then it will make sense, because it will make you understand why your body is insulin resistant and why you're having a problem either losing weight, you're having a problem with diabetes, pre-diabetes or diabetes, you have a problem with your fingers being numb and tingling, your feet being tingling, you having excessive peeing, you are tired all the time, you have your belly is fat and you can't get rid of the fat belly, just so many things, it causes so many things. And not only does it is it very prevalent when you in promoting pre-diabetes and diabetes, right? It is also a serious serious risk factor for chronic diseases such as cancers, heart disease, a whole bunch of things. Okay, so it's a very, very serious condition that you need to take take it serious and then be able to help find ways to reverse it, okay? Or to help become more insulin sensitive. Okay, so we talked about the adipokines being secreted by the adipose tissue. We also talked about the dietary fat that blocks it, okay? Now, let's go into, so when the dietary fat does that, it also, builds up glucose in the cells as well, in the blood, as well as insulin in the blood. All right, and then thus making your insulin resistance worse, right? So, and just said, the insulin resistance is also a high risk factor for many chronic diseases such as heart disease, hypertension, hypercholesterol, kidney disease, cancers, and much more. And a lot of people think that only fat people have insulin resistance. No, sir, no, ma'am. Many people have insulin resistance. If you have high blood pressure that's not being controlled, you got to watch your diet. You got to watch what you're putting in, because a lot of times you probably put in a lot of cholesterol containing foods or oil saturated fat containing food. So it might not show as you being overweight or obese, right? However, it is affecting your inside, because physiologically you're responding to it. Your blood pressure is high, your cholesterol is high. You're probably not sleeping well. Your feet is you have eye problems. You having a lot of mucus. So you got to look at all these signs. You understand what I mean? Because you have diabetics who are also small. They might not be overly overweight, but they're small. And when we start talking about diabetes, you see that it's not only diabetic type 1 and type 2. There are different types of diabetes, but type 1 and type 2 are the most prevalent that people know about, or type 1.5. Okay, so when we talk about diabetes, we will, go in further with that, or explain further. Okay, so the question is now, how do we solve this problem? How do we get the insulin down and the glucose down from our bloodstream? And that is the question that we're going to answer the next part of this, which is part 2. So I will. It's a very interesting topic, because of course I'm a nerd. I did biochemistry, so I love biochemistry and I love the physiological, components of this. But you have to understand it to be able to make the proper dietary choices, and also the proper exercise and other things. And that's why on this channel, we promote 90 to 100% whole food, plant-based, or increased consumption of fruits and vegetables, legumes and on a daily basis. I mean, I tell people, eat as raw of the food as you can. Fruits, you just wash it and eat it. Vegetables, you just cut it up and eat it, okay? So eat as raw as you can. So we'll leave that question for next time. And please, if you ever want to be able to do this and improve your health, do not hesitate to reach out to us, Renew Health Clinic, 706-507-9407, and ask about the 28-day Renew Health transformation program. If that program is closed for the month, we will always have another one the following month, okay? And we want to be able to help and coach you through this. It's free, so just, I think the only thing I recommend is buy the cell support, because when you have detox symptoms, these herbs really help you with the detox symptoms. And it also helps curb your appetite initially when you're not, used to consuming a lot of just fruits and vegetables, okay? So I just want to let you know that I love you. I know God loves you, and I love you more. In this channel, we are all about support and making sure that you get healthy, because we are also working to get ourselves healthy. So I love you. God bless you. Renew Health Warriors. You got this. I'm your biggest, cheerleader and your biggest support. And we will be able together to do this together and get healthy and express our best self to the world and to ourselves. God bless you.